This is Fothentic History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Brian Young.
And I'm Holly Fry.
So, this is part 2 of the story about Beren and Lúthien. And to recap, in part 1, we established the Silmarils and the evil Morgoth, who was now in possession of them. We discussed the war that set Beren on his path after the destruction of his home and family. There, he encountered the elvish princess Luthien and asked her father, Thingol, for her hand in marriage. And Thingol didn't react very well to this and offered his daughter's hand in marriage on the condition that Beren bring back one of the Silmarils from pretty much the most evil person in the land.
And Beren set out on this foolish quest and called in the help of the elvish king Felagund. And along with 10 other companions, they all set out to accomplish the deed at hand. So as a reminder, neither Brian nor I are scholars of the elvish tongues. So while we have made every effort to pronounce things correctly, we apologize in advance for anything that we have inadvertently butchered. It is a safe bet that's going to happen.
So let's get on to the journey of Felagund and Beren. So, on their journey, in the lee of the shadowy mountains, Beren, Felagund, and their company came upon a band of orcs. They waited until nightfall and slew every single one of the orcs. And under the cover of darkness, Felagund was able to fashion orcish disguises for each member of the party and dressed this way, they were able to press their way further north.
It should be noted that there are varying accounts of this particular portion of the story. Some accounts cite the werewolf Lord Thu as their captor in the next section, and others claim that it was in fact Sauron. We feel like the more reliable sources in the Quenta Silmarillion lead us to Sauron, and that's the version of the story that we're going to tell here. So with that aside, Beren and Felagund's band thought their plan was foolproof, but Sauron was pretty instantly suspicious of this band of orcs. They weren't following their patrol orders, they were moving much more quickly than the other orcs under his command, and they weren't reporting their deeds to any of the other bands that they passed by. So knowing something was up, Sauron had the band of orcs captured and brought before him.
Yeah, that's really suspicious.
These really fast-moving orcs that don't want to talk to anybody or brag.
So, at this point, Felagund and Sauron became locked in a contest of power because Sauron had them, they got captured easily. And Felagund and Sauron became locked in a contest of power, singing songs of powerful magic and wizardry back and forth. The power of Felagund was indeed great, but Sauron's skill was a match for it. This contest was spoken of in the Lay of Lúthien, and I'll just read a brief passage of it. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering, as ever more strong the chanting swelled. Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought of Elveness into his words. Softly in the gloom they heard the birds, singing afar in Nargothrond, the singing of the sea beyond the western world on sand of pearls in Elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor the red blood flowing, beside the sea where the Noldor slew the foam riders, and stealing drew their white ships with their white sails. From lamplit havens the wind wails. The wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea. The captives sad and Angband mourn, thunder rumbles, the fires burn. A vast smoke gushes out, a roar, and Felagund fell before the throne.
Though Sauron had defeated Felagund and stripped the entire company of their disguises, their identities were not actually known to him, and their purpose in this journey had still gone unrevealed. To this end, Sauron tossed them in a deep, dark pit, threatening to kill them all in an especially cruel manner unless one of them betrayed the rest and gave up the information.
Every so often, a pair of eyes brightened in the dark of their pit. And they belonged to a werewolf who would consume alive one of the members of Felagund and Beren's party. Though they were being slaughtered one by Sauron's werewolves, none betrayed their cause. Eventually, only Felagund and Beren remained. Sauron had instructed the wolf to devour Felagund last, sensing that he was the most powerful of them and must be their leader. So the wolf came for Beren next.
Before the wolf could devour Beren, Felagund used what was left of his power and let out a flurry of song that was able to slay the wolf. But in this act, and the ensuing conflict with the wolf, the rest of his power left, and Felagund was killed as surely as the wolf, leaving Beren alone in this dark pit of despair.
The only hope Beren found was in hearing Lúthien's song, though he wasn't sure how. He heard her voice singing to him in the dark.
It turns out that Luthien set out to find Beren on her own. And on her way, she was waylaid by Celegorm and Cerufin, the third and fifth sons of Feanor. Like many elves, Celegorm fancied Luthien and did not want her to leave the kingdom. He hoped that his marriage to her would bring him more power and closer to Thingol. And this might have worked if it weren't for his hunting hound, Huan.
Huan was the Hound of Valinor, bestowed special powers by the Valar. He was as tall as a small horse, a great hunter, and was given the gift of speech, but he was only allowed to use this gift 3 times in his whole life. It was also prophesied that only the greatest wolf that ever lived could kill Huan. The first time the hound spoke, it was because he'd taken pity on Luthien and her story, so he told her of a way to escape from Celegorm's clutches. Huan fled with her, forsaking his master, and allowing Luthien to ride him like a steed in order to hasten the journey to save her love, which is something he didn't do for anyone. Riding Huan, the Hound of Valinor, like a steed was that would be disrespecting him, but he allowed it in this case.
So Luthien arrived, with Huan at her side, at the bridge that led to Sauron's Isle, and sang a song of power. And this is the song that Beren heard. He responded with a powerful song of his own, but he couldn't leave Felagund's side inside the darkened pit. To answer Beren's song, Luthien let loose a song of even greater power. And the wolves in Sauron's keeping howled, and the isle itself trembled. Seeing this, Sauron sent one of his wolves to kill Huan and capture Luthien.
Silently, Huan killed the wolf, biting into its throat. So Sauron sent another wolf, and Huan killed it. He sent all of his wolves, and Huan slew them all. So Sauron decided to send after them Dragluin, the sire of all the werewolves. And the battle between Huan and Dragluin was fierce, and the father of werewolves was unable to overcome the might of the Hound of Valinor. So Dragluin escaped and went back to Sauron, nursing his mortal wounds.
At the feet of Sauron, just before he died, Dragluin told his master that it was Huan down there fighting for Luthien. Hearing this, Sauron knew immediately and exactly what he had to do. He took the form of a werewolf and went down to fight the exhausted hound on his own.
And obviously, he knew that because it was prophesied that only the greatest werewolf who ever lived could defeat Huan. So Sauron and his arrogant SOB thought that would be him, obviously. So Sauron in wolf form was a terrible sight to behold. In fact, when he came across the bridge to confront Luthien and Huan, his visage was so terrifying it caused Huan to startle and flinch. And Sauron used this opening to attack Luthien herself, but Luthien was not without her defenses. She was able to sing a cloak of darkness around Sauron that confused him long enough for Huan to recover and attack from the side.
The wolf Sauron was mistaken in thinking that he was the greatest wolf who ever lived. And so, by force of magic and prophecy and sheer will, Huan was able to take the Dark Lord by the throat and pin him to the ground. Sauron shapeshifted from wolf to serpent, but he still could not shake the jaws of Huan. He shifted again from serpent to monster, but still remained pinned. Sauron could do nothing but surrender to Luthien, and she demanded he leave immediately, leaving her control of Angband.
He agreed to these terms, and bound by his oath, he took the form of a vampire and fled to the forest of Tarnufin, and lived there for a time, filling the forest with his horrors.
It was then that Luthien was able to go rescue Beren, and she found him mourning Felagund. Together, they buried Felagund, and they freed the other prisoners of Sauron. And they spent much time there in the forest, rekindling their love before continuing on with their quest. He vowed that once he'd brought Luthien to the safety of Doriath, he would once again go out on his quest for a Silmaril to win her hand. But Luthien refused him and instead offered an ultimatum. They could wander the world together and forsake the quest, or she would go with him to complete it. Those were the only two options she gave him.
Beren didn't like that. And after a brief altercation with Caligorm and Curufin, he used that as an opportunity to leave Luthien and Huan behind as he sought to fulfill the quest on his own. He went north toward the evil places of the world, but Luthien would not be lost. She and Huan rode to Sauron's Isle, and at Huan's suggestion, for he spoke a second time, they found the pelt of Dragluin and the skin of the bat creature Thuringwithel and disguised themselves in them so that they might pass through unnoticed by the evil things.
They found Beren quickly, and he knew that Luthien was never going to leave his side. Together, along with Huan, they made their way to the gate of Angband, through all the perils Morgoth's land could offer. But at the gate was something that they did not expect. A wolf, of a size that they had never seen before.
Yeah, Morgoth was not unprepared for their arrival. He'd heard that the Hound of Valinor was with these heroes and on the hunt, so he found one of Dragluin's whelps, fed it with his own hand, and put some of his own power into the creature. Morgoth had the fire and the anguish of hell enter into this werewolf, and he named it Carcharoth, the Red Maw.
Still in disguise, Huan and Luthien, with Beren disguised as a wolf himself behind them, came up to the bridge of Carcharoth, who guarded the gate. Carcharoth smelled that something was off, and he denied them entry. And that's when a light emanated from Luthien, and she cast aside her disguise. With a song, she bade Carcharoth to sleep, and he went down into a slumber as quickly as if he'd been struck by lightning.
With the greatest wolf that ever lived sleeping at the gate, Beren, Luthien, and Huan snuck their way into Morgoth's labyrinth. Morgoth paid no mind to Beren or Huan, but could see Luthien, for she'd cast off her disguise. She offered to sing as his minstrel, and sang a song of such great power that it blinded him. All the creatures of Morgoth's court fell asleep, the fires in the hall dimmed, and Morgoth himself pitched forward. She covered him in the same cloak of darkness she'd used on Sauron, and sang the dreaded Dark Lord to sleep as well.
Morgoth's crown, the one that held the Silmarils, tumbled to the floor, and with his knife Angrist, Beren was able to cut a Silmaril from the crown. He tried to grab a second gem, but fate was not with him in this effort. His knife snapped and shattered as he tried. A shard of it flew towards Morgoth and cut his cheek deeply. The monster stirred, although it did not wake. Beren, Luthien, and Huan needed no further invitation than that to get out of there immediately. So, foregoing their disguises, they left the way that they came.
But as they reached the gate, they realized that Carcharoth had risen. Luthien was spent of her power and could not put the wolf back down, as she'd just done this with the darkest lord the world had ever known. So Beren brandished a Silmaril in his right hand, showing the wolf its power and bidding him to leave them be. The wolf was startled for a moment, which gave Huan and Luthien a chance to escape, but Beren's ruse worked only for a moment.
So it was then that the devouring spirit inside Carcharoth answered, and the wolf reached out with his jaws and bit off Beren's hand at the wrist, swallowing it and the Silmaril whole. This was bad news for the wolf. The heat and light of the Silmaril burned his cursed flesh from the inside, and he turned and fled in a random direction. He was howling in anguish and madness. Any living thing that came into his path he killed, and it was said that the terror of Carcharoth in that state was one of the worst that the land had ever known.
Beren, swooning from his wound, thought his quest was over and it would end in his death, but Huan had signaled for help from the other noble beasts in the land, and the eagles flew Luthien and the wounded Beren back to the borders of Doriath. Huan made his way back to them as well on foot, and together, Luthien and Huan nursed Beren back to health before they went once more to the court of Thingol.
Thingol's court was full of dread because of the news that they'd received of Carcharoth's whirling dervish of destruction, so everyone there was on edge. And when Beren arrived, he was not the most welcome until he told Thingol that he had in fact come back with a Silmaril in his hand. Thingol bade him to show it, but Beren, of course, ended up revealing the stump of his right hand. He and Luthien told everyone the tale of their quest, and they realized that the cause of Carcharoth's madness had been the Silmaril.
Since Carcharoth's path of destruction took him closer and closer to Thingol's throne with each passing day, everyone in the court there decided they would all work together to destroy the wolf. Thingol led the party. Huan went on the hunt, as well as two of Thingol's captains, Mablung the Heavy Hand and Beleg Strongbow. Of course, Beren, who is now known as Beren Urchamian, which meant one-handed, went with them as well.
And together they tracked Carcharoth to a waterfall along the path of the Isgalduin River. They surrounded the crazed monster, and it attacked at nightfall. It snapped its angered jaws at Thingol, and Beren stabbed it with a spear, but it swept them aside. It was then that Huan leapt from behind and found himself locked in mortal combat with Carcharoth. For those that witnessed it, they said there had never been a fight between wolves with such ferocity. In the howls of Huan, it was said, could be heard the wrath of the Valar. In the howls of Carcharoth, it was said the malice of Morgoth could be heard.
At this point, Thingol found Beren mortally wounded from Carcharoth's blow. Thingol knelt beside Beren and watched the battle above him unfold as Huan and Carcharoth fought atop the waterfall, spilling rocks down below. Huan was able to kill Carcharoth, but Huan fell himself from the waterfall, landing near Beren. Carcharoth's poison was killing the Hound of Valar, who was prophesied to die by the greatest wolf that had ever lived.
It was here that Huan spoke his third and final time. So with his last breaths, he said farewell to Beren. And for his part, Beren did not speak, but he merely put his hand on the head of the dying hound in silence.
So Mablung arrived and saw the scene before him, his king kneeling in front of the mortally wounded Beren and the deceased Huan, and he cried. In anger, he went to Carcharoth and cut open his belly, withdrawing from it the Silmaril still clutched in Beren's unspoiled hand.
And they crafted a bier to carry the mortally wounded Beren and Huan home together, side by side. Luthien met them on foot and went straight for Beren. He looked upon her, and she told him to wait beyond the western sea for her, but the life left him then.
And there, in the hall of Mandos, Beren's spirit waited. Mandos was the doomsman of Valinor. He pronounced judgments of fate and kept the slain in his halls. Not long after Beren's death, Luthien wasted away in grief, willing herself to die to be with her love. When she reached the hall of Mandos, she knelt at the feet of Mandos and sang a song that was noted for its beauty and sorrow, weaving together the grief of men and the sorrow of the Eldar.
So moved was Mandos that he summoned Beren's spirit to them. He could not grant them life again or change their fate, but he could request that Manwë, the Lord of Valar, intercede. Manwë, too, was moved and offered Luthien two choices. She could leave behind Beren's spirit and wait for her place in the Blessed Realm with the rest of her people, or she could return to Middle-earth. In exchange for her immortality, they would grant she and Beren mortality again, and they would have to endure a second death, but they would have their time together in corporeal form.
This was the doom she chose. She and Beren lived their days out happily together, but the elves ever lamented the loss of Luthien the Beloved, who was gone from them forever. In the Lay of Lúthien, the story is summed up thusly. And thus in anguish Beren paid, for that great doom upon him laid, the deathless love of Luthien, too fair for love of mortal men. And in his doom was Luthien snared, the deathless in his dying shared, and fate them forged a binding chain of living love and mortal pain.
And so that is the tale of Beren and Lúthien.
I'm still choked up about Huan's death.
That's the hard part for me too. And I'm gonna probably sound like a super betrayer when I say I feel bad that even for Carcharoth.
Yeah.
It was not his fault that he was raised to be evil.
No, it wasn't.
And it was not his fault that he went on a mad dervish killing spree.
No.
That is an animal that is a result of his poor upbringing.
And but what else can you do at that point? It's not like he was going to let them get near him to split his belly open to take the Silmaril out.
Oh, right. Although then there becomes a whole question of did it not pass through? I don't know.
I think there was some magical business going on there.
Magical digestion.
Yeah.
Surely they could have sung it out.
Songs don't solve every problem, Holly.
They seem to. I'm gonna give her an out and say that she was out of songs at that moment. Her power was depleted.
Well, what's the song for making a wolf pass a stone?
I don't know. It didn't. I think MythBusters got rid of that. They disproved that myth of the brown note, like that musical note that would allegedly make humans anyway have a bowel movement. So I presume it would also be equally false for wolves, although in this world, there's no telling.
Yeah. So that's it for the second part, our two-parter on the tale of Beren and Lúthien. And if we don't have any mail, unless you've got some, Holly, mysteriously.
No. Since we all know that I am terrible with mail.
So if you would like to send us a message about this episode or any others that we've done, you can do so by going to fauthentichistory.com and filling out our contact form. And where can people find you, Holly?
I am at Surliest Girl, and of course they can find the podcast at Fauthentics.
And then for me, you can find me at Swankmotron. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, like Holly just said, if you look up Fauthentic History, and you can find the podcast wherever podcasts are, on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play or wherever else they are. And if you'd leave a review, we'd be very appreciative of that. So unless you've got anything else, Holly.
I do not.
You never do, but everyone, like, at one point you're going to be like, I do, Brian, and then you're going to launch into something, and I'm going to be wholly unprepared for it.
Oh, it's going to happen. Just give it a minute.
So for Holly and myself, thank you for listening. That was the tale of Beren and Lúthien. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Brian. We'll see everybody next time.